The Seamstress and the Viscount's Promise. Chapter 1. The Wedding Gown. Miss Nell Ashford had sewn for half the ladies in London and been welcomed by none of them. She had stitched satin for countesses, hemmed muslin for debutantes, repaired lace worth more than a year of her wages, and once spent 3 sleepless nights embroidering silver leaves upon a court train for a duchess who later complained that one leaf curled the wrong way. Nell knew the measurements of women who would not have known her name if it had not appeared on a bill. She knew which ladies breathed shallowly when their husbands entered the room, which mothers pinched their daughters' arms before fittings, and which young brides stared at their wedding gowns as if the silk were a sentence. Yet she herself entered every grand house through the servants' door. At 24, Nell had long ago learned that London society depended upon invisible hands. Hands like hers fastened hooks, repaired torn hems, altered gowns overnight, and preserved reputations by making last season's garments appear new. But the women attached to those hands were expected to hear nothing, see nothing, and say even less. Nell was poor at the last requirement. "You are frowning at that bodice as though it has insulted your family," said Mrs. Vale, peering over her spectacles. Nell sat at the long table in the workroom behind Mrs. Vale's dressmaking shop near Bond Street. Around her, 3 younger girls bent over sewing, while rain ticked softly against the window panes. Before Nell lay an ivory wedding gown of uncommon beauty, satin soft as cream, Brussels lace at the overskirt, seed pearls at the waist, and sleeves puffed in the newest fashion. "It has done worse," Nell replied. "It belongs to a bride who does not want it." Mrs. Vale's needle paused. She was a widow of 50, thin, shrewd and kind only when no customer was present. "You cannot know that." "I fitted Miss Marborn last week. She looked at this gown as if it were a coffin." "Hush. No one hears us. Walls hear, servants hear, customers hear what was never said and repeat it as truth." Mrs. Vale lowered her voice. "Sir Edmund Marborn is not a man to offend. His daughter is marrying Lord Philip Merriton, Viscount Hale. We are fortunate to have the commission." Fortunate brides usually smile. "Nell." Nell sighed and drew the needle through the satin. "Very well. I shall be silent, invisible, and grateful." "You always promise all 3 and manage none." Despite herself, Nell smiled. By late afternoon, the gown was wrapped in tissue and laid carefully in a long box. Mrs. Vale sent Nell to Grosvenor Square herself, for no apprentice could be trusted with so valuable a garment. Nell travelled by hackney as far as she dared, then walked the remaining distance beneath a grey sky, carrying the box in both arms. The Marborn house was handsome, polished, and stern. A footman directed her round to the side entrance without troubling to ask her errand. Inside, the kitchen smelled of roasting meat, warm bread, beeswax, and anxiety. Servants moved quickly, speaking in whispers. Nell had worked in enough grand houses to recognize the atmosphere of domestic fear. It clung to walls like smoke. A maid led her up the back stairs to a dressing room where Miss Cecilia Marborn stood before a tall mirror. The bride was 21, fair-haired and delicate, with blue eyes shadowed by sleeplessness. Her mother, Lady Marborn, stood behind her like a general inspecting troops. The wedding gown had already been removed from its box and shaken out upon the bed. "You are late," Lady Marborn said. "I was told 4 o'clock, my lady." "It is after 4. "By 3 minutes." Mrs. Vale would have groaned had she heard it, but Lady Marborn only stiffened. "Attend to the waist. Miss Marborn has lost weight again. The gown hangs poorly." Nell looked at Cecilia. The young lady's hands were clasped so tightly that the knuckles whitened. "I can take it in," Nell said, softening her tone. "Though if Miss Marborn eats a proper breakfast before the wedding, it may need letting out again." Lady Marborn's eyes flashed. "You are here for alterations, not advice." "Yes, my lady." Nell helped Cecilia into the gown. The satin slid over the young woman's shoulders with a whisper. Once fastened, it transformed her into the picture of a bride society would admire, pale, graceful, ornamental, obedient. Nell hated it. She knelt to adjust the fall of the skirt, then rose to pin the bodice. Cecilia trembled beneath her touch. "I shall not prick you," Nell murmured. "I am not afraid of the pins." The words were so low that Lady Marbourne, who had turned to scold a maid about a misplaced ribbon, did not hear. Nell met Cecilia's eyes in the mirror. "No?" Cecilia swallowed. "Do you think it possible for a woman to disappear inside her own life?" Nell's fingers stilled for only a second. "Yes, miss." The door opened before Cecilia could answer. Lord Philip Merriton entered carrying a folded note. Nell had heard his name in the workroom often enough to have formed an opinion before meeting him. Viscount Hale, heir to the Earl of Merriton, was said to be handsome, indolent, charming when he chose, and careless when he did not. He was also said to be marrying Miss Marbourne because his father had run through money as though it were water, and Sir Edmund Marbourne had enough of it to purchase consequence. He looked every inch the careless nobleman. Tall, dark-haired, elegantly dressed, with a face made for admiration and an expression that suggested the world rarely surprised him. Yet when his gaze fell upon Cecilia in her wedding gown, something changed. A shadow crossed his eyes. Concern, perhaps, or guilt. "Forgive me," he said. "My mother asked me to deliver this to Lady Marbourne." Lady Marbourne brightened at once. "How attentive, my lord. Cecilia, stand straight." Cecilia obeyed. Philip's mouth tightened. "Miss Marbourne, are you well?" "How kind of you to ask," Lady Marbourne said quickly. "She is merely nervous." "I asked, Miss Marbourne." The room chilled. Cecilia lifted her eyes. "I am well enough, my lord." Well enough is not always well. Lady Marbourne's smile became brittle. "Brides are often overcome by feeling. Then perhaps we should listen when they are overcome." Nell stared at the pearl trim as though it required intense study, but her ears sharpened. Lady Marbourne opened the note, scanned it, and said, "Your mother approves the breakfast arrangements. Sir Edmund will be pleased. He wished to speak with you below about the settlements." Philip bowed to Cecilia. "Until later." Cecilia did not answer. He left with Lady Marbourne, but the door remained not quite closed. Voices rose in the corridor beyond. Nell should have moved away. She did not. Sir Edmund Marbourne spoke first. "You will not embarrass me again by questioning my daughter before servants and tradeswomen." "I would rather embarrass you than marry a frightened woman," Philip replied. "You will marry her because the agreement is made." "No agreement is honourable if one party has been forced." Sir Edmund laughed softly. "Honour? Your father borrowed from me under 4 different securities and 3 separate lies. Without my money, Merriton Park is lost, your mother is disgraced, and your sisters will have no dowries worth mentioning. Do not speak to me of honour. My father's debts are not Cecilia's duty. Nor are they mine, yet I am prepared to settle them. My daughter brings fortune, you bring title. It is a fair exchange." "And if she refuses?" "She will not." "Why?" A pause followed. Then Sir Edmund said, "Because her brother has made debts of his own. Less respectable debts. Dangerous men hold them. Cecilia knows what may happen to Harry if she proves selfish." In the dressing room, Cecilia made a small sound and gripped the edge of the table. Philip's voice lowered. "You threaten your own daughter with your son's ruin." "I instruct my daughter in duty. You call cruelty by very polished names. And you call weakness conscience. The wedding takes place in 5 days. Remember what depends upon it." Footsteps moved away. Nell looked at Cecilia. The bride was white as the satin she wore. "Miss Marbourne," Nell whispered, Say nothing. Cecilia's voice trembled. Please. Your brother is in danger? Harry gambled. Papa paid the first debts, but there were others. A man named Raskin has them now. Papa says only this marriage can keep Harry safe. Lord Hale's family needs my fortune. My family needs his title. Everyone needs something but me. Nell's heart ached. Does Lord Hale know everything? He suspects, but he is trapped too. Trapped men can still move. Can they? Cecilia looked down at the gown. I feel as though everyone has sewn me into this. Nell glanced at the pins in the bodice. Then seams can be opened. Cecilia looked at her with sudden hope, and Nell regretted the words at once. Hope was dangerous when one had no plan to honour it. I only meant... I know. Cecilia's face closed again. You must forget what you heard. But Nell had never possessed the useful talent of forgetting. When the fitting ended, she carried her empty box downstairs through the servants' passage. Near the side entrance, Lord Hale waited alone, hat in hand. Miss Ashford. She stopped. My lord. You heard. Nell considered denial. Then she considered the misery in Cecilia's face. Enough. Will you repeat it? To whom? People who would believe me, or people who could help? His mouth twitched, not quite a smile. You speak plainly. Plain speech is cheaper than polite speech. Working people can afford it more often. His expression sobered. Is she very distressed? She is being forced into marriage to save two families who have failed her. He flinched. Good, Nell thought. Let truth have teeth. I will not marry her unwillingly, he said. Then do not. If I break the engagement without proof of coercion, Sir Edmund will ruin my family and perhaps her brother. And if you do not break it, you ruin her. The words hung between them. Philip looked at her not as a lord might look at a seamstress, but as a man confronted with judgment. You are right. Nell was startled into silence. I have been telling myself sacrifice is honour, he said. Perhaps I liked the sound of it because it made cowardice respectable. The honesty unsettled her. She had expected arrogance, perhaps irritation. She had not expected humility. I hope you find courage quickly, she said. Miss Marbourne has little time. He bowed. Thank you, Miss Ashford. She stepped past him into the damp London evening, but his voice followed. And you? Have you never wanted something beyond the place others gave you? Nell turned. Every day, my lord, but wanting does not pay rent. Then she left him standing beside the servants' door, the fine gentleman and the plain truth both looking lonelier than before. Chapter 2. The Missing Bride. 2 days later, Lady Marbourne sent for the veil, or rather, Lady Marbourne sent for someone to blame because the veil could not be found. The summons arrived at Mrs. Vale's shop with all the urgency of a fire. The lace veil, an heirloom apparently older than affection, had vanished from the Marbourne dressing-room. Lady Marbourne insisted it had been packed with the gown. Mrs. Vale insisted it had not. Since neither woman could insult the other directly without risking custom or consequence, Nell was dispatched to Grosvenor Square to clarify the matter. I am being sent as a peace offering, Nell said, tying her bonnet. You are being sent as an employee, Mrs. Vale replied. Do not offer opinions. Do not look clever. Do not become involved. I shall attempt all three. Attempt harder. When Nell reached the Marbourne house, she found it in chaos. Servants hurried up and down stairs. A maid cried in the hall. Lady Marbourne stood in the dressing-room, flushed with temper, while Sir Edmund's voice thundered somewhere below. The wedding gown hung untouched, but the veil was absent. Search her box, Lady Marbourne commanded the moment Nell entered. Nell stiffened. My box is at Mrs. Vale's shop. Then search her pockets. My lady. You were the last tradeswoman here. I was never alone with the veil because I never saw it. Lady Marbourne's eyes narrowed. You were alone with my daughter. Only while fitting the gown. You spoke to her. Nell held her gaze. Most fittings require speech. Before Lady Marbourne could answer, a maid burst in, trembling. My lady, Miss Cecilia is not in her room. The silence that followed was worse than the shouting. Lady Marbourne turned slowly. What do you mean? Her cloak is gone, and the small travelling case. The maid saw her before breakfast, but not since. Sir Edmund appeared in the doorway. His face was dark with rage. Find her! Nell's stomach turned cold. Cecilia had fled. For one brief, wild instant, Nell felt relief. Then she saw Lady Marbourne's gaze settle upon her like a knife. You helped her. No. You filled her head with defiance. I did not. Sir Edmund stepped forward. You heard too much the other day. I saw your face. Where has she gone? I do not know. Liar. Nell's hands curled at her sides. I did not help Miss Marbourne leave, but if she has gone, perhaps you should ask why your daughter feared staying. Sir Edmund raised his hand. Not to strike, perhaps, but to point, to command, to silence. Before he could, Lord Hale entered. He looked as though he had come in haste. His hair was windblown, his coat unfastened, his face pale. What has happened? My daughter has been abducted by foolishness and assisted by insolence, Sir Edmund snapped. Philip looked at Nell. Miss Ashford? I know nothing of where she has gone. He believed her. She saw it at once. Sir Edmund saw it too. Do not be deceived by a pretty show of innocence. Search her rooms. Question the woman who employs her. I will have Cecilia returned before nightfall. Philip stepped between them. You will not threaten Miss Ashford. She is a seamstress. She is a person under accusation without evidence. Sir Edmund laughed. Do you intend to ruin yourself for a tradeswoman? Philip's face hardened. No, I intend not to ruin myself further by cowardice. Lady Marbourne gave a faint cry, but Sir Edmund looked suddenly wary. Nell glanced at the dressing table. A drawer stood open. Inside lay a torn scrap of paper. She would not have noticed it had she not spent years spotting thread ends and mismatched trims. She stepped closer while the others argued. On the paper, written in a shaking hand, were 3 words. Harry, Raskin, River. Nell picked it up. Philip saw the movement. What is that? She handed it to him. His face changed. She has gone after her brother. Sir Edmund lunged for the paper, but Philip held it away. Where is Harry? Sir Edmund said nothing. Where is he? Lady Marbourne sank into a chair. Edmund, tell him. Sir Edmund's jaw worked. Raskin sent word last night. Harry was taken to a house near Wapping. I intended to settle it after the wedding. After? Philip stared at him. Your son is being held by a debt collector, and you intended to wait? I intended to preserve my daughter's future. You intended to preserve your bargain. Cecilia's note shook slightly in Philip's hand. Then he turned to Nell. Will you come with me? With you? You found the clue. Cecilia spoke to you. If we find her, she may trust you before she trusts any of us. Mrs. Vale's warnings rang through Nell's mind. Do not become involved. Do not be noticed. Do not let great people use you and discard you. But Cecilia had gone alone to men who frightened even her father. I will come, Nell said. Sir Edmund's face darkened. You will do no such thing. Nell looked at him. You have mistaken command for right, sir. I am not your daughter. Philip's carriage was brought round. Nell climbed into it before anyone could change their mind. As the horses moved off, she folded her hands tightly in her lap to hide their trembling. Philip noticed. "You are afraid," he said. "Yes. Yet you came. Fear is not always a reason to stay behind." He looked at her with quiet respect. "No, it is not." They began near St. James's, where Harry Marbourne had lodgings paid for by his father and debts paid for by no one. His rooms were empty, save for a frightened valet who admitted Harry had been taken 2 nights earlier by men belonging to Captain Raskin. From there, Philip visited a gaming house while Nell waited in the carriage among fog, wheels, and passing faces. When he returned, his expression was grim. "Raskin keeps a house near the river. He lends money to young fools, then sells their fear to older ones." Would Cecilia go there? If she thought Harry was there, yes. Then so must we. The city changed as they drove east. Polished squares gave way to narrow streets, damp warehouses, taverns, and the thick smell of mud and tar. Nell had known poverty all her life, but this part of London carried danger differently. It leaned from doorways and watched from windows. Raskin's house stood near the wharves, respectable enough to avoid notice and sinister enough to deserve it. A broad man opened the door and blocked the entrance. "Captain Raskin is not receiving." Philip's voice was cold. "He will receive me." He said no visitors. From somewhere above came a muffled cry. Nell's heart lurched. That was a woman. Philip stepped forward. "Move." Perhaps it was his rank. Perhaps it was his expression. The man moved. They climbed the stairs quickly. A door stood ajar at the top. Inside, Cecilia knelt beside a young man slumped in a chair, his lip bruised and his shirt stained. Harry Marbourne looked more ashamed than injured, which Nell considered a mercy. Captain Raskin stood near the mantel. He was a thin, silver-haired man with cold eyes and exquisite manners. "Lord Hale," he said, "how tiresome of you to arrive before matters concluded." Philip entered. "Miss Marbourne, are you harmed?" "No." Cecilia clutched Harry's hand. "But Harry—" "Harry owes money," Raskin said. "A common condition, though rarely a dignified one." Philip's gaze moved to the small jewel casket on the table. "Cecilia, what is that?" She flushed. "Mamma's jewels. I thought if I paid him—" "Mostly paste," Raskin said. "Touching, but insufficient." Nell looked at the casket, then at Raskin. "You never meant to accept payment from her." His cold eyes shifted to her. "And who are you?" "A woman who understands bad bargains." Philip glanced at her, but she kept her attention on Raskin. "You wanted her frightened," Nell said. "Frightened enough to go home and marry. Then Sir Edmund pays you for silence, Harry's release, and Cecilia's obedience." Raskin smiled faintly. "A sharp little needle. I have had practice finding rot beneath fine cloth." Harry groaned. "I am sorry, Celia." Cecilia's eyes filled. "Be sorry later. Stand if you can." Raskin moved toward the door. Philip stepped in front of him. "You will let them leave," Philip said. "Will I? You will send every note, debt and account relating to Harry Marbourne to my solicitor by noon tomorrow. Any legitimate sum will be examined. Any false charge will be challenged." Raskin laughed softly. "Your father's debts make you a poor judge of false charges. My father's debts have made me an excellent student of them." The two men stared at one another. Raskin's smile faded first. "You cannot protect everyone, Lord Hale." "No, but I can begin here." They left with Cecilia on Philip's arm and Harry leaning heavily against Nell, who bore his weight with more irritation than sympathy. In the carriage, Cecilia wept quietly. Harry apologized until Nell told him that apologies were best saved for useful action. Philip sat opposite, watching the siblings with a face drawn by guilt and resolve. At last he looked at Nell. "You saved them." "No, I spoke. You acted." "I have acted too little for too long." "Then continue." He leaned back, weary but changed. "You are very stern for someone who rescued a Viscount's bride." "Former bride, I hope." Cecilia lifted her head. "Former. If I must sweep floors for a living, I will not marry because my father commands it." Nell smiled at her. Sweeping floors is honest work, though hard on the back. Philip looked between them, and something softened in his face. It was not admiration alone. It was recognition, as if he had lived among silk curtains all his life and only now discovered the strength of the beams holding up the house. By evening, Cecilia and Harry were taken to Merriton Park under Lady Merriton's protection. Philip insisted Nell return to Mrs. Vale's shop in his carriage. "You must allow me to explain matters publicly," he said, as they reached Bond Street. Nell laughed without humour. "Public explanations by gentlemen rarely save women like me. I will not let you be blamed. You may not be able to stop it." He looked pained. "Then I will try harder than I have ever tried." Nell paused with one hand on the carriage door. "Why?" His answer came quietly. "Because you have taught me that honour is not what a man preserves. It is what he protects." She did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. The next morning, 3 customers cancelled orders. By noon, the story had spread. Cecilia Marbourne had disappeared. Harry Marbourne had been found in disgrace. Lord Hale had behaved recklessly, and a seamstress named Nell Ashford had meddled in affairs far above her station. Nell read the first cruel note at Mrs. Vale's counter and felt no surprise. Society never needed evidence when a working woman stood conveniently near the scandal. Mrs. Vale put a hand on her shoulder. "We shall survive this." Nell looked toward the street where fine carriages rolled past, filled with women whose gowns she had made and whose support she did not expect. "Yes," she said, "but survival is tiring work." Chapter 3. Merriton Park. Lord Hale came to Mrs. Vale's shop the following afternoon. The bell rang, conversation ceased, and every needle in the workroom seemed to pause mid-stitch. Philip stood in the doorway wearing no expression of careless ease. He looked tired, serious, and very much aware that his presence could either help or harm. Mrs. Vale emerged from behind the counter like a small, armed nation. "My lord?" "Mrs. Vale." He bowed. "Miss Ashford." Nell kept her hands folded. "Have you come to bring more scandal? We have had a generous supply already." "I have come to ask for help." Mrs. Vale stiffened. "Then ask your solicitor." "I have. He requires something only Miss Ashford may be able to give." Nell's brows rose. That is a dangerous sentence in a dressmaker's shop. A faint smile touched his mouth and vanished. "Sir Edmund's hold over my family depends upon debts my father barely understands, and accounts Sir Edmund refuses to open. My solicitor suspects some charges are false. The difficulty is that many payments were hidden through household bills, dress accounts, jewel repairs, allowances, commissions to tradespeople. Miss Ashford recognised Raskin's scheme quickly. She may recognise more." Mrs. Vale crossed her arms. "And where are these accounts?" "At Merriton Park." "No." Nell looked at her employer. "Mrs. Vale." "No, absolutely not. You will not go to a country estate with a Viscount whose broken engagement has already cost us customers." Philip accepted the rebuke. "Lady Merriton invites both of you, formally. She wishes to commission gowns for my sisters and alterations for Miss Marbourne during her stay. Payment in advance, separate rooms, proper respect, every propriety observed." "And every gossip supplied with fresh meat," Mrs. Vale said. "Perhaps, But Sir Edmund is preparing to accuse Miss Ashford of aiding Cecilia's disappearance. If we prove his debts fraudulent, his threats lose force. Nell's mouth went dry. He means to continue blaming me. Yes. Then I suppose I must go. Mrs. Vale turned on her. Nell. If I remain here and do nothing, he ruins me at his leisure. If I go, I may at least watch the knife. Mrs. Vale's face softened with fear. Child, noble families survive by letting others fall beneath them. Philip's voice was quiet. Then let this one learn differently. Nell looked at him. She wanted to distrust him. It would have been safer. But he had stood between her and Sir Edmund. He had gone to Raskin's house. He had taken Cecilia away, not as a possession recovered, but as a person protected. Very well, she said, but I go as Mrs. Vale's employee, not your guest. Of course. And I will not be hidden below stairs when the truth concerns me. No. And if your mother looks at me as though I have brought contagion into her house, I leave. Philip's eyes warmed. My mother is more likely to ask whether you have eaten. Mrs. Vale muttered, That remains to be seen. 2 days later, Nell travelled to Surrey in Mrs. Vale's company with trunks of fabric, account books, and enough anxiety to supply the entire county. Merriton Park surprised her. She had expected grandeur without warmth. Instead, she found a handsome estate worn thin by neglect and worry, long windows in need of paint, gardens recovering from poor attention, carpets faded by sunlight, and servants whose loyalty seemed mixed with exhaustion. The house had dignity, but not ease. Lady Merriton received them in the drawing-room. She was a graceful woman with silver in her dark hair and sadness in her eyes. Philip stood beside her, not as a lord presenting tradeswomen, but as a son hoping his mother would prove worthy of his faith. Mrs. Vale, Miss Ashford. Lady Merriton took both their hands. You are welcome here. My son tells me we owe you more than courtesy. Nell curtsied. My lady, I did only what circumstances required. Few people do even that. Cecilia entered then, pale, but steadier than before. She embraced Nell with sudden affection, causing Mrs. Vale to blink. I am so sorry, Cecilia whispered. All this blame has fallen on you because of me. No, Nell said. It has fallen because your father threw it. Lady Merriton's mouth curved. A useful distinction. The days that followed were unlike any Nell had known. By morning, she worked openly with Lady Merriton and Mrs. Vale on gowns for the Merriton sisters, 2 lively girls who treated Nell with shy admiration after hearing she had faced Captain Raskin without fainting. By afternoon, she sat in the library with Philip and his solicitor, Mr. Havers, examining ledgers. By evening, she returned to her room so tired that even worry could not keep her awake. The accounts were a forest of deceit. Sir Edmund had purchased several of the Earl of Merriton's debts, then added false charges through intermediaries. Payments to Raskin appeared under harmless headings: lace, imported trim, French gloves, carriage repairs. There were commissions listed to dressmakers who had never existed and jewellers whose addresses led to empty rooms. Nell recognised patterns because she understood bills as men of rank rarely did. She knew the cost of fabric, the rhythm of orders, the difference between extravagance and invention. This charge is false, she said one afternoon, tapping a page. Philip leaned closer. How can you tell? No bride orders mourning lace in June for a ball gown delivered in May. Mr. Havers blinked. I confess that would not have occurred to me. It would not occur to most men. That is why Sir Edmund hid it there. Philip looked at her with undisguised admiration. You see everything. No, she said, only what others ignore. His gaze held hers a moment too long. Nell looked away first. It was dangerous, this growing awareness of him. In London, he had been a nobleman with a troubled conscience. At Merriton Park, he became a man in motion, rising early to meet tenants, speaking with his mother over accounts, apologising to servants for economies he had never noticed, sitting beside Harry Marbourne until the young man could confess the whole miserable catalogue of his debts. Nell watched him change, and worse, she liked him for it. One evening, she found him alone in the library, staring at a portrait of his father. "The Earl?" she asked. "My father at 30. Before debt made charm his only occupation. He was handsome. Yes, people forgave him for it. People often do." Philip smiled faintly, then sighed. "I used to think my family's troubles were misfortune. Now I see how much of misfortune is merely neglect wearing a sad expression." Nell stood beside the table, unsure whether to leave. He turned to her. "Your father was a tailor, you said." "Yes." "Did you learn from him?" "At first. He used to let me sort buttons, then threads, then scraps. By 12 I could set a sleeve better than his apprentice. By 14 he was gone, and cleverness became income." "And your mother?" "Her eyes failed from fine work. She lives with my aunt in Deptford. I send what I can." "That is why you endure difficult customers." "That is why I endure many things." He was silent for a moment. "Do you never tire of being brave?" The question reached too tender a place. Nell's ready wit deserted her. "Yes," she said. "Often." Philip's face changed. He did not pity her. She could not have borne that. He looked as though he had been trusted with something fragile and did not know whether he deserved it. "I am sorry," he said. "For what?" "For belonging to a world that makes bravery necessary and then calls it impertinence." Nell almost smiled. "That is a long apology." "I have much to apologise for. Not everything is yours to mend. No, but some things are." Their eyes met again. This time Nell did not look away quickly enough. The next morning, Sir Edmund Marbourne arrived. He came with Lady Marbourne, a solicitor, and the air of a man prepared to command obedience from walls if people failed him. Lady Merriton received him in the drawing-room. Philip stood near the mantel. Cecilia sat beside Lady Merriton, trembling but upright. Nell remained near the window with Mrs. Vale, where propriety placed her and truth required her. Sir Edmund opened with outrage. "My daughter has been unlawfully detained." Cecilia lifted her chin. "I am here by choice." "You have been influenced." "Yes," she said, "by fear. It made me obedient for too long." Lady Marbourne flinched. Sir Edmund's face darkened. Philip laid a packet of papers on the table. "We have examined the debts." Sir Edmund gave a short laugh. "Have you? With what expertise?" Mr. Havers stepped forward. "Mine, sir." "And mine," Nell said. Every head turned. Mrs. Vale made a faint sound, half warning, half pride. Sir Edmund's eyes settled on Nell with satisfaction. "Ah, the seamstress. I wondered when she would forget her place." Nell's heart beat hard, but she did not lower her eyes. "I know my place very well. It is why I hear so much." "You admit meddling?" "I admit listening when powerful men speak freely because they mistake working women for furniture." Philip's expression flickered with admiration. Sir Edmund stepped closer. "You encouraged my daughter to run." "No, your threats did." "You insolent—" "That is enough," Philip said. "No, let her continue," Sir Edmund snapped. "Let us hear how a seamstress understands matters of debt and marriage." Nell moved to the table and opened one ledger. "This charge claims 48 yards of French lace supplied for Lady Merriton in March, but the lace is billed at less than half its proper price, which means it is not lace at all but a disguised payment. The same initials appear beside 7 such charges. R. K. Captain Raskin." Here, a jeweller's repair bill refers to stones reset in a necklace Lady Merriton sold 2 years earlier. Here, a dressmaker's commission is paid to an address that does not exist. The room was silent. Nell closed the ledger. I may be a seamstress, Sir Edmund, but I know false stitching when I see it. Sir Edmund's solicitor had gone pale. Philip placed another document beside the ledger. Copies have been sent to London. If you attempt to accuse Miss Ashford, coerce Cecilia, or collect false debts, the matter becomes public. Sir Edmund looked at him. You would expose your own father. Philip's jaw tightened. I would expose yours first. Lady Marbourne whispered, Edmund, stop. But Sir Edmund was staring at Cecilia now. You would ruin your family. Cecilia's voice shook, but she answered, No, I'm trying to save what is left of it from you. For the first time, Sir Edmund had no reply. He left Merriton Park less triumphant than he had entered it. That evening, rain passed over the estate and left the gardens shining. Nell walked beside a low stone wall where roses nodded under drops of water. She needed air. She needed distance. Most of all, she needed to remember who she was before Lord Philip Merriton's respect became dearer than safety. He found her there. Miss Ashford. She turned. My lord. You were magnificent today. I was angry. Can a woman not be both? Despite herself, she smiled. You are learning. I have an excellent teacher. The warmth between them frightened her more than Sir Edmund's threats. Philip came closer but stopped before impropriety. Nell. She drew a breath. Do not. He stilled. My lord, please do not say what I think you mean to say. His voice was low. And if silence becomes dishonest, then let us endure dishonesty a little longer. I love you. The words landed softly, devastatingly. Nell turned away. The wet roses blurred before her. Philip continued, I do not say it from gratitude, nor rebellion, nor pity. I love your courage, your wit, your honesty, your refusal to vanish simply because the world commands it. I love you, Nell Ashford, and if you could care for me. I do care for you, she said, and hated the break in her voice. That is why this cannot be. He took one step, then stopped. Why? Because you are a Viscount. That is an accident of birth. It is not an accident to the world. It decides where you sit, whom you marry, whose mistakes are forgiven, and whose smallest error becomes disgrace. I would marry you. And society would call me ambitious, calculating, improper. Your sisters would suffer. Your mother would be pitied. Every room I entered would turn cold. I would stand beside you. Yes, and I would still be the one they blamed. She faced him then. You can survive scandal because you have rank beneath you like stone. I have work, reputation, a room I pay for. If those break, I fall. His face tightened with pain because he knew she was right. I would protect you, he said. You cannot protect me from being looked down upon by people whose approval governs your life. It need not govern mine. Not today, but in a year, in 5, when your children are whispered about, when old friends withdraw, when every kindness to me becomes proof of your noble sacrifice. She shook her head. I will not be your act of conscience. You are my heart. Tears burned her eyes. Do not make it harder. He said nothing. The silence hurt more than argument. I leave tomorrow with Mrs. Vale, she said. The accounts are sufficient. Cecilia is safe. My work here is done. My feelings are not work. No, they are the danger. She walked back to the house before he could answer. The next morning, Nell left Merriton Park. Philip stood at the door beside his mother, pale and silent. Lady Merriton embraced her. Cecilia wept. Mrs. Vale watched everything with sharp, sorrowful eyes. Philip bowed over Nell's hand but did not press it. "Thank you, Miss Ashford," he said. "Goodbye, my lord." As the carriage rolled away, Nell did not look back until the house was nearly lost among trees. When she did, Philip was still standing there. Chapter 4. A Seam Made Strong. London did not forgive quickly, but it became bored sooner than Nell expected. Within a fortnight, the worst whispers moved on to fresher scandals. Sir Edmund Marbourne retreated from public life under the respectable excuse of ill health. Captain Raskin left London rather suddenly. Harry Marbourne entered a clerkship under Mr. Havers, where his wages were modest and his supervision severe. Cecilia went to Bath to live with an aunt who possessed both kindness and a talent for refusing visitors. Mrs. Vale's shop survived. Indeed, once Lady Merriton's prepaid commissions arrived and two influential ladies quietly praised the workmanship, business improved. Customers who had cancelled returned with explanations so thin that even the apprentices saw through them. Mrs. Vale accepted their orders and raised her prices. "You are becoming merciless," Nell observed. "I learned from aristocrats," Mrs. Vale said. "Only I give better value." Nell worked, ate, slept, and told herself that peace was the same as contentment. She sewed sleeves, fitted bodices, corrected apprentices, sent money to her mother, and refused to read every newspaper item that mentioned Lord Hale. Mrs. Vale read them aloud anyway. "He has settled the honest debts," she announced one morning. Nell kept stitching. "Has he?" "Sold land to do it, challenged the false claims. His father has gone permanently to the country. Lady Merriton is receiving visitors again." "Good. Miss Marbourne has refused a baronet in Bath." "Better. Lord Hale has not married." The needle paused. Mrs. Vale watched her over the rim of her spectacles. "Very interesting." "Not to me." "No, I see your indifference has stabbed that hem quite crookedly." Nell unpicked the stitch in silence. Weeks passed. Spring warmed into early summer. Then, one morning, a letter arrived, addressed in an elegant feminine hand. Nell recognized Lady Merriton's seal. She opened it with fingers that were not as steady as she wished. "My dear Miss Ashford, I hope you will forgive the liberty of this invitation. My daughters and I are establishing a school at Merriton Park for girls who must earn their living by needlework, service, shop work, or household management. Too many young women are taught to sew, but not to reckon wages, taught obedience, but not the value of honest labour. We wish them to learn stitching, accounts, letter writing, measurement, and the confidence to conduct themselves with dignity. There is no one I would trust with this work as I would trust you. The position is salaried, independent, and permanent if you wish it so. A cottage near the village has been prepared as the schoolroom. Mrs. Vale has already been consulted and has promised to scold me if my terms are insufficient. My son knows I write but has not dictated one word. Yours with sincere respect, Helena Merriton." Nell read the letter twice. Then she looked at Mrs. Vale. "You knew." "I suspected." "You consulted." "I scolded." Nell sat down. "I cannot go." "Why?" "Because he is there." "Yes." "Because I refused him." "Yes." "Because my heart is not a parcel to be carried back to Surrey because his mother offers employment." Mrs. Vale's expression softened. "No. But your gifts are not a parcel to be left in London because you are afraid." Nell looked away. Mrs. Vale sat beside her. "You told him no because you feared being swallowed by his world. This school would be yours, your work, your wages, your name." "And if he asks again?" "Then answer from the woman you are when you are not terrified." Nell's eyes filled. "I do not know who that is." "Yes, you do. She is the one who spoke to Sir Edmund Marborne with a ledger in her hand. A week later, Nell travelled to Merriton Park. She told herself she went for the school. This was true. It was not the whole truth. The cottage stood near the village green, freshly whitewashed, with wide windows and a clean-swept floor. Inside were sturdy tables, shelves for cloth, slates for arithmetic, ink, paper, measuring tapes, scissors, and bolts of plain cotton. A small office at the back contained ledgers waiting for Nell's hand. Lady Merriton greeted her with warmth, but no pressure. "My son is in the north field with the steward," she said, after showing Nell the schoolroom. "He does not know the hour of your arrival." Nell pretended that this did not matter. The first lesson took place 2 days later. 12 girls arrived, daughters of tenants, a blacksmith's niece, 2 maids from the great house, 1 shy child whose mother took in laundry, and a pair of sisters who had walked 3 miles with a basket of mending between them. Nell stood before them and felt the shape of her life shift. "You will learn stitches here," she said, "but not only stitches. You will learn what work is worth. You will learn accounts, measures, letters of order, and how to read a bill before anyone persuades you it is beyond your understanding. You will learn to be respectful without disappearing." The girls watched her solemnly. A small red-haired child raised her hand. "Must we look grand ladies in the eye?" Nell smiled. "When they speak to you, yes, politely." The child considered this as if it were revolution. At the door, unseen by the girls, Philip stood listening. Nell noticed him only when the lesson ended. He waited beneath a hawthorn tree in bloom, hat in hand. "Miss Ashford," he said. "My lord." "I hope the schoolroom pleases you." "It does." "I am glad." They stood in the awkwardness left by love interrupted. At last Nell said, "Your mother wrote a persuasive letter." "She usually does." "You did not dictate it?" "No." "But you hoped I would come." "Yes." The honesty almost made her smile. "You might have pretended indifference." "I have done too much pretending in my life." After that, he came often to the school, always with a proper reason. A shelf required repair, the chimney smoked, the girls needed slates. A supplier had sent poor thread, and Lord Hale, apparently, had never before known thread could be poor. Nell found herself explaining twist, strength, and dye while he listened with grave attention. One afternoon, little Bess, the red-haired child, informed him that his cuff button was loose. "Miss Ashford could mend it," Bess said. "Miss Ashford has greater responsibilities," Philip replied. "Could you teach me?" Bess did. Philip pricked his thumb. The girls laughed until Nell had to turn away lest she join them too openly. Slowly, the impossible became less so. Not easy. Never easy. There were whispers in the village at first. Some servants were uncertain whether Nell belonged above or below stairs. A visiting lady once mistook her for a maid and then grew offended when corrected. Yet Lady Merriton gave no room to insult, Cecilia wrote weekly from Bath. Mrs. Vale sent advice disguised as criticism, and Philip treated Nell's work not as a charming charity, but as a serious enterprise. He did not speak again of love. That silence, once a relief, became a question. In June, Lady Merriton held a small gathering at Merriton Park to raise subscriptions for the school. Nell resisted attending until Lady Merriton looked at her and said, "If you hide from the room will think it has defeated you." So Nell went. She wore a gown of dove-grey muslin she had made herself. It was simple, but the fit was perfect. Mrs. Vale had sent a narrow ribbon for her throat with a note, "Not too plain. You are not attending your own funeral." The drawing room was full when Nell entered. Local gentry, neighbours, Lady Merriton's daughters, Cecilia newly arrived from Bath, Mrs. Vale from London, and several ladies who looked at Nell with curiosity sharp enough to pin butterflies. Philip crossed the room to greet her in front of everyone. "Miss Ashford," he said, bowing, "you honour us." No one could mistake the respect in his voice. Nell's heart steadied. She spoke that evening about the school. At first her hands shook, but her voice grew stronger. She spoke of wages, accounts, honest work, and the danger of sending girls into the world with skill in their fingers, but no defense against being cheated. She did not apologize for caring. She did not beg for approval. She made the room understand. By the time she finished, the rector's wife had promised slates, Sir John Elbury offered winter firewood, and a lady who had arrived sceptical asked whether her own maid might attend the accounts lessons. Mrs. Vale wept openly and denied it when accused. Later, Nell stepped onto the terrace for air. The summer dusk lay soft over the gardens. Lanterns glowed in the trees, roses scented the warm evening. Philip joined her. "You were splendid," he said. "I was frightened." "I know." She looked at him. "You always seem to admire me most when I am terrified." "I admire you because you continue." The words settled between them. From inside came laughter, music, the murmur of a room that had not defeated her after all. Philip's voice softened. "I have kept silent because I promised myself I would not press you." "I know." But silence has begun to feel like cowardice again. Nell's breath caught. "I love you," he said. Still, more now than before. Not because you saved Cecilia, or exposed Sir Edmund, or made me ashamed enough to become better. I love you because you are yourself with a courage I will spend my life honouring if you permit it. She looked out over the garden. "I was afraid loving you would make me disappear." "I know. I was afraid your world would swallow mine." "I know. And what has changed?" "You have built something here that belongs to you, not to my title, not to my mother's generosity, not to gossip, to you. If you marry me, I will not ask you to leave it. I will not ask you to become ornamental. I will not use love as a polite name for possession." Nell turned to him fully. "And society? It will talk, yes. It will judge. Yes. It will wound us sometimes." She swallowed. Philip continued. "I cannot promise ease. I can promise that you will never stand alone in it. I can promise that your work remains yours, your name honoured, your judgment valued, and your courage never treated as a novelty for drawing-room amusement. I can promise partnership." Nell's eyes filled. "That is a serious promise." "I am a serious man now. You made certain of it." She laughed through tears. He smiled then, hopeful and uncertain. "If I say yes," she said, "Mrs. Vale makes the gown." "Of course. And the school continues." "Always. And I keep my own accounts. I would not dare interfere. And when you are foolish, I will tell you. I depend upon it." She held out her hand. "Yes, Philip." For a moment, he simply stared, as if joy had struck him speechless. Then he took her hand carefully, reverently, as though every callus were a jewel. Inside, Cecilia saw them first, then Lady Merriton, then Mrs. Vale, who began crying again and declared to anyone listening that she had known from the beginning, which was only partly true. There was scandal, naturally. There were letters of disapproval, visits of curiosity, invitations withheld, and invitations offered precisely because others had withheld them. Some called the match romantic, others unsuitable, a few disgraceful, and several secretly admirable. Nell heard enough to know she would never be fully forgiven by those who believed birth should remain unchallenged, but she was no longer asking their pardon. The wedding took place in the village church at Merriton Park. Lady Merriton wore blue. Cecilia stood beside Nell, no longer pale with fear, but bright with affection. Harry attended soberly and quietly, still earning back trust one day at a time. Mrs. Vale presided over the gown with the authority of a field marshal. It was not satin. Nell had chosen ivory muslin, fine but simple. Mrs. Vale cut the bodice. The schoolgirls embroidered tiny leaves along the hem. Nell finished the sleeves herself because some seams must pass through one's own hands. When she entered the church, Philip turned. There was no careless lord in him now, no mask, no resignation, only love, steady and astonished. Nell walked toward him without lowering her eyes. The world beyond the church doors remained imperfect. It would still measure worth by name, fortune, and birth. It would still mistake gentleness for weakness and labour for invisibility. But within that church stood people who knew better. A bride who had refused to be bought, a mother who had chosen courage over comfort, a dressmaker who had risked her business for love, and 12 girls who watched their teacher become a viscountess without ceasing to be herself. Philip took Nell's hand. They made their vows clearly. Not a bargain, not a rescue, not a surrender dressed in lace, a promise. And Nell, who had spent her life making seams strong enough to hold under strain, understood at last that love was not the silk that hid a wound, nor the ornament stitched on for show. Love was the joining, the honest seam, the visible place where two separate lives met, were tested, and held. When she and Philip stepped out into the summer light, the schoolgirls scattered petals from their baskets. Mrs. Vale wept into her handkerchief. Cecilia laughed. Lady Merriton smiled as though the house itself had been restored, and Nell Ashford, seamstress, teacher, wife, and woman of her own making, walked beside the man she loved into a future neither rank nor scandal could unpick. The end. My dear listener, I thank you most sincerely for keeping company with this tender tale of the heart. It is my fondest hope that this Regency romance has brought you a measure of comfort, delight, and quiet reflection, as our dear characters journeyed through sorrow, hope, devotion, and the promise of enduring love. If this clean historical romance has pleased you, I would be most grateful if you would offer a like, leave a kind comment, and subscribe for more heartwarming Regency love stories and audiobooks. Until we meet again, may your days be gentle and your heart well supplied with happily ever afters.